Kerpow. That's the sound of me starting a live broadcast in the park. The car's in the shop today. And so what that means is that I've got my one wheel here, which I can show you. There she is. There's Breezy, as I call him. Oh, my Facebook Live didn't like me rotating my camera. And so I planned ahead. I brought that so I could come down, do the live show here in the park. Oh, boy, what's going on? Stay right there. And I even was smart enough, really intelligent, some might say, incredibly intelligent, to bring a tripod with me down here to the park. So it was all set up. My tripod's a really good tripod. It's got like counterweights, which are not on it, because I forgot the most important part of the tripod, which is the legs that make it a tri. So right now, the phone is on a unipod. It's on just a long stick with a single connection. Screw off. What's up, Susie? Poor wireless connection, my butt. I had to reinstall the Facebook app onto my phone to do this. So this is a very rare, very exciting occasion for us. I missed the live show last week. I've been away for 2 weeks working with ayahuasca. So I didn't want to miss this one. And I did that thing once I realized, oh, I'm dumb and forgot the most important parts. I'm going to do it anyhow. We'll see how it goes. You can also tell like the camera's a bit high. This tripod's just a touch too high. I can't bring it any further down. This unipod, I should say. So anyhow, we're going to give this a go. We'll see how it goes. But you get this nice view. Isn't that a beautiful background? There's sun coming just off camera right there, shining through. We've had our daylight savings time change, which is awesome because that means that it stays light out here in Victoria till about 7:30 now, which is super good because I like late nights, and also super good because it means that you can play pickleball later in the evening outdoors. So it's a double whammy for us. So here's the topics. I've got the topics right here. I'm going to tell you what those topics are, and then where I'm going to start is talking a little bit about my journey with ayahuasca over those last 2 weeks, and then we'll dive into these. So we got some really good suggestions from the audience. Big thanks to Jessica, Austin, Tibby, Monica, and America. Thank you for providing all the questions that you provided, bringing all the topic suggestions. Way more fun for me when you guys bring those. So we'll talk about subconscious negative beliefs and how do we work with those alongside our logical understanding that they're just a belief. How do we actually work with that? How do we do something with that? We'll talk about finding direction, especially when it feels like nothing's really compelling enough. And what do we do with that? Should we just sit? Should we run off and get really busy? How do we work with that? Tibby asks about a book, Straight Line Leadership, which I'll speak to, as well as he asks about professional athletes. How do you work with them? How do you support that kind of personality? So I'll talk about that kind of personality type. Monica asks about how do you develop leadership in people that lack empathy, like sociopaths, perhaps. Maybe not sociopaths, but people that just lack empathy. And then America asks if I can talk about a vulnerability hangover. I'm well familiar with those, so I will do so. So let's start just briefly. I'll share a little bit about my experience most recently in ceremony, and then we'll dive into these topics. They're really juicy. There's like a gang of seniors walking down this sidewalk. I hope they don't come and get me and provide me baked goods and whatnot. So typically I've gone and sat in ceremony for a week at a time. And what that entails is drinking the medicine for 4 days back to back. And then there's breath work on either side. There's integration classes, so on and so forth. This time going down, Bay and I were both there for 2 weeks. I was leading the integration classes, so I'll describe a little bit what that was, but I was leading the integration classes in the second week. And throughout all of those 2 weeks, I was drinking the medicine. And this isn't necessarily normally what would happen, but I'm kind of in the process of learning, discovering my capacity. And a big theme for me over the course of my time here was trusting the medicine. She was really teaching me how to trust her. And trusting the medicine sounds like a really wacky thing when our context for ingesting a substance to heal is one of like drugs, like in Western medicine. Trusting, like if it was like, I'm trusting the Percocet, you would probably be a little bit concerned about your uncle if they were telling you that. But the indigenous context, the lineage of the Colombian tradition that we work with, the Yahe tradition, as well as Peruvian, all of the tribes that have done work with this medicine, the context we have for this work is that we drink the medicine, and what it does is it supports us to do our own healing. So the medicine is not making us better. The medicine is helping our ego drop away so that then we can be with the stuff that our ego is otherwise protecting us from being with. And the metaphor that I like to use here is kind of the analogy of when you injure yourself playing a sport. So if any of you watching have ever injured yourself, maybe playing squash because it's awesome, or perhaps pickleball, going up for an awesome smash, ayahuasca, Daniel. Peyote's on my list. I feel called into that medicine too, but ayahuasca is what I'm describing right now. So if you've ever hurt your body, developed an injury, what happens is that the muscles around the injury you've created start to protect you. They kind of adopt a posture, they tighten so that you can't move your arm past a certain point. And what's really interesting about this is this can lead to niggling, recurring injuries that last for years for people. And what's even more fascinating is when people are they've done studies into this, research, where when people are put into a state of being anesthetized, it's a tough word, not such that their whole nervous system goes offline, like that their muscles completely go offline. Their muscles are still there, but just that their conscious mind goes off. What happens is that they have complete range of movement. So it's not that area is no longer there. It's not that injury is still there. It's that the muscles are holding on. Whoop, just saved the. That's what happens with a unipod. Let's see if I can maybe that'll work better. That's a pretty good reaction time. We're gonna do our best with this. I'm working with an imperfect system that I've created. So the muscles more are responding to the memory of the injury. The muscles have kind of integrated or held on to this idea, don't let the arm go past this point. And then that becomes our injury. We learn to live, oh yeah, my arm just no longer goes this point because of that skateboarding injury I had. And so we can do a lot of healing when we take that offline and slowly learn to move into that motion and like almost retrain or have the muscles unlearn that thing. So that's an analog. That's something happening in your musculature. The way that the medicine of ayahuasca is supporting you, us, I, to work is it takes our ego offline. And our ego is very similar to those surrounding muscles. It's the part of my mental construct that protects me and my thoughts from going somewhere that's scary. It stops me from going into there. It doesn't need to. It's just got memory of a traumatic event when it was really important that I stop that. And consequently, it works very hard to protect me from going there. And as a result, my range of motion in terms of my being is locked up. And so when we drink ayahuasca, what happens is that goes offline. The ego is taken offline, and then we can lean into those places where there once was an injury, where there was trauma, when we were young, when we were old, when we were whatever. What that does is allows us to heal that so that then when the ego comes back online, just like when you come back conscious after being anesthetized, you have access to that range of motion where previously there wasn't. So that's kind of the work that the medicine's doing. That's why we talk about trusting the medicine. What trusting the medicine means is that the medicine is going to bring us into a confrontation with that which is frightening to us, because that's the nature of our trauma. And so often what happens is we get into a battle. Our head, our ego kind of jumps back online and then works to protect us from going where we don't want to go. The medicine never forces all of this offline, doesn't take it completely offline. It just sort of softens the bounds of all this stuff. And so what we as humans do is we get frightened. We're like, I don't want to think about that time when that thing happened because I'm afraid of what it'll make me do or how I'll feel or blah, 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 blah. And the work of trusting the medicine is the work of like, and yet this is what is being brought to me. Yeah, I am Obs. Hey, Obs. This is Beacon Hill right behind me. I love you too. So the medicine provides me the opportunity to visit that which is scary so I can heal it. And that's hard. Sometimes we're just not willing to trust that that's the healing process. We're like, fuck that. It's too scary. This isn't for me. This is bonkers. I don't want to do this. No. So the work over these 2 weeks was really a lot for me of learning to trust the medicine very, very deeply, to really be in a continual practice of releasing the part of my ego that's like, don't go there. Go there, yeah, do this healing, but not that. Take on that kind of transformation, but not that kind of transformation. And really setting that aside again and again and again. And the way that looked, I'm not going to talk about specifics to my own process, but more generalities. The way that looked for me was a lot of confronting fear, a lot of finding myself present to visions or memories or experiences that were very frightening for me. And the work, when confronted with fear, is to breathe and to remind the body that we're safe, to remember I'm in a sacred space. There's people all around me holding this space, making sure I'm okay, making sure I don't harm myself, making sure nothing dangerous happens. I am surrounded. I am safe. I am okay. But of course, the mind is like, this is terrifying. This is bad. This is ah. And so the work, often when we're learning to trust to do this work, is to just sit with our fear without reacting to it, without responding to it, without needing to change it, and just breathing it and allowing it to be there. So there's a lot of breathing and a lot of me kind of fidgeting, getting uncomfortable, wanting to move, wanting to leave, wanting to change my environment, because then that would distract me from feeling what I was feeling. And instead, to the point I could, distinguishing that's what was happening. Oh, I'm getting really agitated. I'm really moving around. I'm wanting to get up and dance, or my mind is running off to the future, thinking about what I'm going to eat for breakfast. All of that is a way to not have to face what's currently here for me to face. And then coming back and being like, okay, I'm going to face that. The sun's kind of shining in nicely. I'm getting like a nice Rembrandt kind of vibe going on here. Hey, Tommy, I love Beacon Hill too. It's one of my favorite places. I right over here, just off camera, there's a band shell, for those of you who don't know this area. And as a kid or a teenager, this is where I came to learn breakdancing. So I'd come over here and practice. It's now fenced off. You can't go up there. But back in the day, it was nice, smooth pavement. We could get up there and dance. It was pretty cool. And Daniel, you've heard about ayahuasca, but don't even know how to spell it. That's okay. Spelling it is the least important part. It's not a requirement to working with the medicine. So that's kind of what my journey looked like over these last couple of weeks. And then paired with that, I was also supporting people to find their footing as they went through this week of medicine. And what that means, there's a mallard coming here. What's that mallard? I think it's the man mallard with because the males in the bird kingdom have the fancy plumage. Anyhow, what it means to support people on their own medicine journey is often the medicine brings us an experience, and what happens is we're like, this medicine's not working. This isn't what I need. The medicine's always working. It's hard to really kind of fully grok this until you've sat yourself in a ceremony, but the medicine of ayahuasca is truly intelligent on a level that it's hard for us humans to understand. It always brings us precisely what there is to be brought. It's always supporting us to do this work. And the more you work with this medicine, the more you find again and again, in spite of your insistence that it's not the case, that really is the case. So people come, it's their first time, maybe their second time, they drink the medicine, they have a night where it's like, oh, all I was doing was like going to the bathroom, or I just sat there and nothing happened. I didn't have any visuals. It didn't go the way it was supposed to go. It sucked. It's not working. I'm doing it wrong. And when I'm supporting them, what I'm really trying to do is help them see the thing that they're looking past. And this is the way all transformation works, is we look past the work that's happening right in front of us. Because we have this idea in our mind, I know what it's supposed to look like. I know how things are meant to unfold for me. And this isn't it. This is wrong. This needs to be shifted. This happens every single year in the Forge. People get to a point where they're like, what's happening is wrong and it needs to be different. You guys should change this program. And then the implied thing underneath that is, because then I wouldn't have to feel this way, and the way I feel is wrong. The way they feel is exactly what is required in order to catalyze the transformation that they're here to create. Whatever you're experiencing in your ceremony is exactly the thing that is there for you to experience, so that you can create a new level of freedom for yourself in your life, so that you can create the transformation that you're here for. And so sometimes people think in these classes when I'm teaching, they imagine that it's sort of like, oh, you're telling people how to feel, or you're telling people what to do to make the experience work. And that's really never what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to do as little of that as possible. What I'm really trying to do is support people to come back into a trust with their own process, and for me to get the hell out of the way of that. So really all we're doing is guiding people back to their own process. And this is the heart of all transformational work. So often we want to like mentor people. We want to give them advice. We want to teach them. We want to tell them. We want to let them know what we did that really worked for us, or how we've learned to overcome this. And all of that, while it's done from a beautiful, genuine place, actually just serves to get in the way of their process. They have to discover for themselves what is going to serve them. They have to discover for themselves that the thing that they're doing is actually making them miserable. That can't be told. We can only get that. I did, America, but it's good to see you, and I acknowledge you for your punctuality. I've not gotten into any of our topics yet, so your topic is still right here, right over here. Just talking a little bit about ayahuasca and transformation. We have to let people discover that the choices they're making are creating unhappiness for them. We have to discover, or we have to allow people to discover for themselves that what they want is this, and the reason that they're not going after it is because they've learned not to trust themselves. All of this that I'm describing is wisdom, and wisdom can only be gained through experience. So we have to be given the opportunity for us to experience this stuff and then supported to find our own feet to make sense of the experience we're having. Anytime someone tells you, like, hey, just so you know, I think it would be a good idea for you to only spend 2 months in this entrepreneurial venture before you do X, Y, and Z, that's now imposing my here's what you should do over top of the opportunity for them to discover their own wisdom through experience. The best way they're going to learn how long they should stay in an entrepreneurial venture is by staying too long or too short or just the right amount of time. That's how we learn. That's how we discover things. And so much of this work, as you get into more and more mastery, is you doing less and less telling, less educating, less coaching, less, not so much less coaching, because coaching is really the vehicle by which we support people to find their truth, but like less of all that other stuff, less teaching, less advising, less mentoring, less. And what's cool about that is it becomes less and less work. What's funny about that is the fact that it becomes less work becomes confronting in its own right, because we've learned to find value in working hard. So as long as I'm working really hard, then I've got value. And so as soon as I'm working less, as soon as things feel easier, now I'm confronted by my own stuff again. And that's back to the drawing board, back to more of my work. Okay, well, let's have a sip. That's somewhat tepid coffee at this point. I have to click here, see more on what, oh, there we go. Daniel, you're saying, I once had an unguided experience with peyote when I was young. Damn, son. They explained everything you're discussing, but I think I was too young and naive to truly appreciate it. Yeah, it's a little bit like every now and then I'll come across someone who's, like 18 who wants to be a coach. And they want to learn all of these ways of showing up so they can not make mistakes and like rocket themselves forward in life. But what they don't understand is that making mistakes is essential. We have this belief, we hold a mistake, just this notion of a mistake. We have a belief that we should have been able to have things go differently, and things shouldn't have gone the way they did go. Oh, I wasted so much of my life. No, you spent precisely the number of years required by you and your soul to get the learning that you got from that moment. You couldn't have spent any less time. And so these people seeking to get into coaching earlier, sooner, they're just too young. They don't understand. And part of the reason this is always the case, part of the reason this is the way it goes is in the early days when we adopt these strategies to kind of like survive in life and maybe even thrive to get by, like, for example, having a spreadsheet of all your friends and what they like and what they don't like and what to say, all of that, stuff like that. Maybe that's not your vibe, but when we're young, those strategies are working. And further, we're not really present to the long-term costs of them. It's too new. So when we're young, it's just like, yeah, I've got this all figured out. It's going perfectly. Look at these dumbass adults all around me. They haven't figured this out. They don't understand. And it's more like, you can't understand because it's too new. You're too fresh. You're too young. You're too naive. Not naive stupid, not naive bad, naive beautiful, naive innocent, naive pure. And so the work is really to like embrace that stuff when we're young, and then to be able and willing to be humbled when we get older and to see like, oh, there's some costs that are starting to catch up with me. Leaf's writing, hey Leaf, helping others isn't always helpful. The vast majority of the time, I would say helping others isn't usually really that helpful. And usually helping other people is more for ourselves. We help others so as to alleviate our empathetic discomfort with where they are. So if I see someone over there feeling stupid, that's hard for me to be with because it's really uncomfortable for me to feel stupid. Or for you, maybe it's like someone feels selfish, and that's really hard for you to be with the idea that you're selfish, so you try to alleviate them feeling that way. That's usually what helping really is we're trying to change their experience so that we can feel better. It's totally unconscious. We're completely unaware that that's what we're doing, and it's totally innocent. Our intention to help is always genuine and pure. It's almost never like, I'm going to help this person and fuck them up and throw their process off forever, and it's going to be awesome, and I'll be a villain and I'll twirl my mustache. That's pretty much never how it goes. It's innocent, it's pure, it's beautiful. And then, as you've said in the second part here, Leaf, being in my own work and just sharing my own journey is about it. Yeah, that's the work. That's really the hard work, is because that's a much more humbling place to be. Because as soon as we see someone over there that we're like, that person I could help, the opportunity becomes, what is showing up over there that is also unresolved in my life? Where might there be for me to look? What am I having a hard time being with that's showing up right now that is directing me back to my own work? And then sharing our work as it pertains to our own experience. So more and more in my own life, I really try to, when people ask, like, do you have advice? I try to, I'm pretty cautious about that. I usually tell them no. Because if you were to give me advice, I just wouldn't listen to it. But here's my experience. Here's what I've learned so far. And that's a much more generous way to share something with someone. It's a willingness to just share vulnerably, here's how things have gone for me. And to allow them the entirety of their own process, which is really beautiful work, beautiful spiritual work. Thanks, Daniel. Daniel's saying, I really appreciate the way you verbalize complex ideas and experiences so simply. I appreciate that immensely. That's really nice to hear. Let's get to some complexity then. We've got awesome topics. I'm stoked. So let's start right at the top with Jess. Jess brings a question. Jess and I are going to actually be sitting in ceremony together in a couple of weeks. I'm really excited to see her. I met her first maybe a year ago down in Costa Rica. Thanks for your question, Jess. Super stoked about this one. So she says, can you talk about subconscious negative beliefs about ourselves and our inherent value? I'm worthless. I'm not enough. I should be doing more, blah, 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 blah. How do we meld the logical knowledge that we are enough, brackets, educated enough, whatever enough, with the subconscious belief that we may never be? So part of my own practice, not this week, because this week I've been very human. And by very human, I mean like very resistant. Get up in the morning and I'm like, I'm sleeping in an extra 2 hours. I should write. Fuck you. Fuck you should write. I've got to practice. Do this. Fuck that. There's a lot of like, fuck that that's been in my space this week. That's the nature of me integrating. I'm a little tender and there's some fear up for me. And so my fear is bringing a lot of resistance. And so that's where I've kind of been this week. However, every morning, I typically have a practice of beginning by sitting down and getting clear on what are the negative thoughts, opinions, beliefs, stories that have woken up with me, or that I've woken up with, but I like the other wording more. And the practice of that is always to get down to like, what does this complaint say about me as far as what I am or what I am not? And so there's a crow here biting bark off and knocking it onto the ground. It's a real vandal. Silly crow. So if I have a complaint like that person in traffic cut me off and is a dickhead, where I want to get with that is like, what does it say about me that I have that complaint? So that I'm complaining about that, I'm petty. And that people cut me off, what kind of person gets cut off? I'm unappreciated. I don't matter. I don't make a difference. So I'm always working to get down to the I am statement, because that's ultimately what's underneath any negative story, is some story about who we are or who we are not. So one that's really common for me that I can really relate to is the one Jess has shared, which is I'm worthless. I'm not enough. That's a super, super common experience most of us have. And what we look to resolve these stories, or put differently, the way we react to these shitty stories showing up, is we try to like do enough to prove that it's not true. That becomes the game of our lifetime. I'm not enough. Well, I will go get 3 degrees. I'm not enough. Well, I will get a certification in coaching or law or whatever. I'm not enough. I will go to the Supreme Court and argue all these cases. I have proven to myself that I am enough. But all we're actually doing is proving that the fear is real. Every time we react to a fear, it actually reinforces the truth of it. It actually serves to kind of create that fear as though it's real instead of just something made up. And so what we're working to always is, what's the story I have about myself? And then what is a way to show up in the world completely unrelated to any of these stories? Nothing to do with them, because they're all made up. There's nothing there to fix. All that to say, every morning I wake up, and almost every morning I have these similar stories. I'm not enough, blah, blah, blah. Here's the trouble with our logical knowledge, our knowing, is that your fear is irrational. Your fear is not a function of like logically piecing together X, Y, and Z and then drawing a conclusion about what you are or what you are not. It's that sort of stuff is more like just fear. It's irrational. It's just belief-based. And the nature of your beliefs is that you will gather evidence to support them. So when I'm operating from a belief that I'm not enough, I will interpret all of the stimuli happening around me, all of the way people show up, all of what happens, the way they write my name on the Starbucks coffee mug and call me Mata or something. I will interpret all of that through the lens of, see, here's more evidence that I'm not enough. That's what happens. None of it's logic or rational. And so when we try to defeat that shitty story, that belief that's showing up, when we try to do that using logic, using an argument from logic, it never works. And in fact, again, it just reinforces that story. It reinforces I'm not enough, because otherwise, why would I be arguing about this? Sidebar, this is why affirmations don't work. This is why affirmations are actually kind of toxic, because the intention of a positive affirmation, you are a beautiful person, you are handsome, you are smart, I don't know, whatever affirmations you would give yourself. These are the ones I give myself. The intention behind that is that it reinforces a positive sort of thinking for myself. Oh yeah, I'm handsome, I'm smart. But what it actually does is it reinforces the underlying fear. And what you end up getting in your life is kind of this story, I'm handsome as long as I keep hammering that point into my head, but underneath that, I'm actually ugly. Underneath that, I'm actually stupid. And so you get caught in this push-pull, this tension, where your stakes become very high to continue to like push forward on this idea that you're handsome so that you don't have to be with your fear that you're the other thing. And this is why so much of our lives end up kind of a little bit we become toxically productive or toxically successful. Toxic success is where you have a story that you are irrelevant, for example, and then because you are unwilling to be that story, you learn to succeed and thrive and create a whole bunch of riches. And what's up, dudes? Mallard's going crazy over there. I'll just let you see them. Look at this Mallard party right there. They're like, I am handsome. I'm very clear that I'm extremely handsome. Look at this green head. A beautiful green head. That guy thinks he's blending in with his yellow head. What an idiot. Anyhow. So, toxic success. We have a story that we're not enough. From that story, what we create is a bunch of thriving success, entrepreneurial ventures, CEO of a company. And our life has become a product of, I need to be successful because if I'm not, I'm a failure and I'm irrelevant. And so then your life is kind of this product of you trying to outrun forever this underlying story. Eventually you get people that just burn out because they're like, this fucking sucks. I don't want to keep doing this. I'm not enjoying myself. And the truth is, typically they're not. We're not living a life because it's what we enjoy. We're living a life because it allows us to not have to feel that underlying story. So what do we do with it? What we do with it is we actually sit with the story. We actually give ourselves the opportunity to just be with the idea that we have a story. Instead of trying to change the story, we kind of come to a willingness to sit in this like, there's a part of me that is afraid I'm worthless. That's the first step, is that we kind of have to be willing to sit in that. And often what we want to do, we get afraid of that. We're afraid of sitting in that story because we're like, if I do that, then I lend power to it. And if I lend power to it, it becomes true. But what we can't see is you're already holding it as true. There's a part of you that already believes this is true. So you're actually not, you're not giving over power to it. You're actually just coming to terms with what's already there. Put differently, you're bringing up to the level of your consciousness what's already happening unconsciously. And from there, we can start to move on. We can start to be like, oh, I just have a story that I'm uncool or that I'm worthless or that I don't matter. I don't have to respond to that story, but I also don't have to try to pretend it's not there or argue with it. Anytime you start to construct your life or change your actions based on the story, that's responding to it. You can respond in one of two ways. One way is in opposition. The other way is in alignment with. So if you have a story that you're worthless, actions taken in alignment with that story would be, I'm not going to ask that beautiful person out that I've pined over for 3 years. I'm worthless. They would never want to be with me. I'm not going to invite that person to go play pickleball with me because I'm worthless. Who wants to hang out with me? These are all stories in alignment, all actions in alignment with that story. Actions in opposition to that story would be like, no one thinks I'm worthy. I'm going to prove that I'm worthy by being super successful here. I feel like I'm unworthy. I'm going to prove that's wrong by getting $1 million in the bank by the time I'm 30. So these are actions taken to sort of as a fuck you to the story. Either of those are toxic in the sense that they both reinforce the story. Because if you didn't have that story in the first place, if you held that story as purely fabricated and made up, then you would have no need to do any of that. If I trusted that I was handsome, I would have no need to go out and prove to the world that I'm handsome. I would have no need to fish for compliments. I would just accept that that was my truth. And so what we want to do is we want to let go of all of these. We want to distinguish the actions we're taking as a response to that story by first getting clear on the story and just letting it be. Like, oh, I've got a story. And finally, what we do is, what I find most powerful is to choose a way of being for the day, a way to show up, a quality of being, not a thing to do, but a way to show up, a way to be that has nothing to do with that story. So if I have a story that I'm worthless, a bad choice would be like, I'm already worthy. That's totally a fix for that story, right? I'm worthless. Well, I will just show up as though I'm already worthy. That's like an affirmation. I've layered it over top. However, something like, I'm going to show up and I'm going to bring the being of play today. Play has no connection to worthiness, to worthlessness. I can play regardless of that story. And what that does is it gives me a place to choose to come from that is unrelated to the story, that is completely nothing at all to do with it. And that lets the story lose its power over me. It's still going to be there. There's still going to be times when I go to Starbucks and I'm like, here we go again. They're going to call me Scratum or something once again. And I'm like, oh, that's the story. What would be playful? Well, I could just tell them. Maybe a way to play would be to tell them my name is Scrotum. That just came out of my mouth, and I realized it sounds a lot like scrotum. But that'd be kind of funny if I went up to Starbucks and told them my name was Scrotum. Now I'm stepping into a different way of being that has nothing to do with fixing a story. And what that allows is for hair to get caught in your mouth when you're doing lives. Did I get it? I got it. That's a long hair. It also allows for you to simply have a story and to have it not be meaningful. Oh, I just got a story. No bigs. So that's what you do when you've got that story. Is you stop trying to logically address it. Jess, fantastic question. Thank you. Daniel's saying, unpopular opinion, this is a mustard yellow skull cap. Here in Canada, we call this a toque. Y'all down in the States call it a beanie. Skull cap, I think, would be more like what motorcycle cool bikers would wear, of which I'm not one of them. But I do have, this is an armored leather jacket, which I have fallen with. I have fallen off my one wheel wearing this jacket. There's like a bunch of, I don't know, you can see them, there's like scratch marks on the back from where I skidded along the pavement. Hey, Amy. Amy says I sound like a Landmark graduate. She did not qualify whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. I have a great deal of experience and I guess I would say expertise with ontology, which is fundamentally what Landmark is about, for those of you that don't know. So Landmark is ontological, which is a program designed to support people to step more deeply into the being of their lives. And there's a lot about Landmark that I find doesn't work for people. And the parts that don't work is that Landmark can become, as can ontology, it can become very heady. So if you've ever spent time around people that are really steeped in Landmark, a lot of them are pretty awesome and delightful, and they have a lot of access to their own power. And simultaneous to that, a lot of them can feel kind of like they're disappearing up their own ass. They get very heady about this stuff. Like, Bay and I were at an event with a whole bunch of Landmark graduates. We were working with the leader, the founder of Landmark, Werner Erhard. And one of them was talking and saying they wanted to go out for dinner, but they had a headache. And then the next day, they, or like later on that night, they were like, yeah, I had a headache, but then you know what I realized is a headache's just a conversation. And so I went out for dinner. And so on the one hand, that's really cool. You know, what she's saying is a headache's just a story I have, that like the story she was asserting she had was like her head hurt, but that was significant. And because her head hurt, she should lie down and she shouldn't do stuff and she couldn't go for dinner even though she wanted to, blah, blah, blah. And so she chose a different story. That can be a really powerful way to show up in your life. But at the same time, sometimes a headache just means your head fucking hurts. And it's okay for that too. And I find that truth of being a human can get stepped over in Landmark. So that's where Landmark and I kind of differ, or where I take a bit of a different vibe on ontology. Let's see. Oh, what's up, Ernest? Ernest says, good time, amigo. Hola, amigo. ¿Cómo está? Ernest saying what I'm talking about is aligned with what I just worked with my coach on. Well, your coach and I talk every day, Ernest. I ask them, what do you want me to do a live stream on? They say, I'm going to work on this with Ernest, so do a stream on this in the park with a wobbly monopod. You moron. Rachel, I am feeling playful, and we have this park behind us to play with. Okay, topic dos. Austin asks, can you share your thoughts on, and he puts in quotes here, finding direction, single quotes. I think single quotes are like that, as opposed to double quotes. Can you share your thoughts on finding direction or purpose in life when nothing feels compelling enough, or we are otherwise feeling a bit lost in the void? Brackets, parentheses, are we ignoring and discrediting signals in our life? Do we need to set our aims lower temporarily to get momentum before bigger purposes arise, et cetera, et cetera? So this is something probably most of us can relate to, where it's like, what do I need to do? I don't feel motivated. So what is my purpose? And then we get kind of lost in there. So there's, as is always the case in transformational work, this answer may be a bit frustrating because there's no clear single answer. And the reason for that is, I think, best illustrated through like the metaphor of the middle path. The middle path is what a lot of Eastern teachings, especially Zen Buddhist teachings, speak about. The middle path is like, well, all the birds just flew off over there. I wonder what's going on. Real battle. Let's see if you can you guys see birds all going crazy over there? Some party, some action, crazy bird action. Okay, let's get this straightened out again. Here we go, we're back. So the middle path is like this idea that we're all learning to walk our path, and the best way to walk our path is in the middle. You just have to accept that in this metaphor. And what we do as humans is we're like, what's the right way to walk in the middle of the path? We're looking for that kind of answer. And the sensei says, well, walk. Let's walk together. And then the sensei says, you need to walk a little bit more to the left because you're getting too far to the right. And we're like, oh, great, got it. And then we make that the rule for ourselves. And so the next day, the sensei says, you need to walk a little bit to the right. You're walking too far to the left. And we get to this point where we're like, fuck you, bro. Like, you just told me to walk to the left, and now you're telling me to walk more to the right. And the answer is, yeah, because yesterday you were walking too far to the right, and now you're walking too far to the left. And in learning to get that feedback and to discover where on our path we're walking, we start to be able to calibrate and walk more and more in the middle of our path, in alignment with our soul, our spirit, our essence, our et cetera, et cetera. So what that means is there's going to be a couple answers for this question that Austin's asking, which is a really great question. The first place is often sometimes people feel lost and purposeless in their life, and they're like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do, And I don't know what to do about that. And what's happening in these situations is that people get to this point where they're looking for their motivation, their answer, their salvation, their spiritual guidance, like it's going to be a lightning bolt that hits them in the head. Like there's going to be some moment where the clouds will part and then the light of God will shine down and they'll be like, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do here. Finally, I'm so relieved. And then they go towards it. If not their purpose, this can be the way that people show up around their desire. What do I want? Adam, help me figure out what I want. And then they're hoping kind of like that there's like sort of an answer somewhere where it's written down, Reggie's wants and desires and life purpose, blah, blah, blah. The truth is more annoying, which is that the way we discover what we want is often first by choosing something, anything. Here's a bowl of vanilla ice cream. Here's a bowl of chocolate ice cream. Choose one. And when I use that analogy for people, they're often like, yeah, but I know which of those I like. Great, but how did you come to like one versus the other? I don't know. I learned. I just knew on some level. Yeah, but before you knew, before you tried vanilla, before you tried chocolate, how did you learn? And the way that they learned was they tried something. They chose, they made a decision, and then they discovered from their decision, I think I want to try the other one. They tried the other one. They're like, that's my preference. So sometimes when we're struggling with like feeling lackadaisical a purpose, it's that we're kind of waiting for a purpose to come to us rather than getting into action and discovering for ourselves. Does this gel with me? Does this vibe for me? Am I really stoked about this thing over here? Or maybe not. So sometimes what there is to do is to just choose. And almost always that choosing will happen in the face of like resistance. And often our resistance will come in the form of just feeling kind of meh about it. So sometimes what there is to do is to just honor your meh. Sit in your meh for as long as you feel called to sit in your meh and really empower your meh. And as you take on that kind of action, what you want to do is you want to notice, how is it for me sitting in my meh? Now, most people, when I talk about something like this, will say, I've tried sitting in my meh, but it didn't work. And typically what people actually do is they sit in their meh, but then they make themselves wrong for it. And so they, at the same time, try to also do work on the side. So they're halfway sitting in their meh, and they're halfway choosing their purpose. And so what happens when you do that is you're not really empowering one way or the other. And that just creates some internal tension, and then you can't actually ever discover what's next. So the hard part about this is if we're actually like listless, if we're actually like, I don't want to do anything, then one thing we can do is empower that. So for example, this week, like I was sharing at the start of this live, I haven't wanted to empower any of my structures. And so the practice for me has been to like, one, to go a little deeper for myself. What am I feeling underneath this desire to go and do something else? Like that desire to hit snooze on my clock? What's the feeling? Before I hit it, I'm going to let myself do it. But what do I feel? I feel, and then like often what I feel is like anger, like the desire to like rip off my clothes or like, that kind of energy. I'm not going to rip my clothes off here. Not even my mustard hat. But that's what I feel underneath it. And then the practice becomes, okay, can I really let that be the way it goes? Can I fully empower that? And only in fully empowering this stuff can we then actually discover what's next. We tend to, when we're considering fully empowering our meh, we sort of like halfway empower it because our fear is if I really let myself do nothing though, then I'll never do anything. And then I'll just become a slug and I'll have no money and I'll become homeless and it'll suck and I'll be a garbage human being. But look at where you are in your life. That's patently not going to be the case. You obviously have a phone. You're watching this live. You're probably working. Not right now, hopefully, but whatever. You've got a job, you're successful. It's just not who we are. And so what happens is we get caught in this half and half attempt to kind of halfway feel what we feel, and all that does is it prolongs it. It's the exact same thing as if you're feeling angry at someone, but then you're telling yourself it's wrong for you to feel angry and that you should feel really happy. And if you do that, what happens is your anger just festers and you stay angry for longer and longer. Whereas if you really came honestly to like a reckoning with yourself, and we're like, fuck this guy, I'm fucking mad at him, that's my truth, I'm going to express that anger directly into this pillow for the next 10 minutes. If you did that, then the anger could move on. So that's how we work with that. Hey, Andrew. Andrew says, is that a real background? It looks like one of those altered Zoom backgrounds. Good morning to you. This is Beacon Hill Park. It does kind of look like I'm sort of in front of a green screen. It's very still, but there's someone walking a dog over here. I'm not in my room dressed up to look as though I have a green screen behind me. But this is, most of the island here is like this, is sort of like, it looks like a beautiful green screen. Look at this incredible, I don't think these are roses, but look at the, can you guys see them? The blossoms on this, can you see the blossoms on that tree? Right there. That's a nice, there's a lot of flowers around me right now. It's very lovely. Good springtime. So on the one hand, sometimes what we have to do is just lean into the meh and be like, fuck it, I'm just going to sit in my purposelessness. On the other hand, sometimes what there is to do is to actually just be like, okay, I'm gonna choose something, and I'm gonna lean into it. I'm gonna see how that goes for me, and discover what there is to discover down that path. I would say that people tend to have a bias in one of two directions. So our biases tend to be, there's one group of people that will sort of like, I won't take action until I see the light of God. So these people tend to be more inclined towards like, I don't feel inspired, so I'm not going to do anything. And then what ends up getting created in their life is they become at the effect of inspiration hitting them, which is fine if that's the life you want, right? If the life you want is one where you move only when you feel kind of moved, that's okay. The consequence of that is that your life tends to move fairly slowly, and you tend not to create that much because you're at the effect of how you feel on any given day. That's okay. Sometimes that can be kind of frustrating, and these people in this place often are like, it's annoying, I want to do more, but I don't feel this certain way, but I'm unwilling to act until blah, blah, blah. So that's that bias in that direction, and for those people, it's often really good for them to like just get into action, even though they have resistance to it. In fact, of course they'll have resistance to it. It would be weird if they didn't have resistance to it. And then the other side of the thing, the other kind of bias are the people more like me, where we have zero tolerance for just sitting. It's very hard for me to just sit. I'm very driven. I'm very A-type personality, Adam-type personality. And so for those of us like this, it can be really valuable to kind of just slow down and honor what's showing up. Right now, I don't feel like doing stuff. Can I honor that? What's the feeling underneath that resistance to taking on any action? And what if I held that really substantial, really sacred? So you might, Austin, you might look to see like which of those two things would be my bias, and then practice in the other direction. Would you right here, Andrew? Looks like I missed a juicy conversation around you sounding like a landmark graduate. Juicy it was. Okay, we've got some questions from Tibby. Let's hit up these Tibby questions. Tibby says, you recommended the Straight Line Leadership book a few times, and I love it. But what I've noticed is that Dusan Jukic as the author, doesn't care or deal with any underlying beliefs and stories, but just moves clients into action. I'm sure his cut through the BS approach works and generates results, but I'd love to hear your perspective on this, benefits and drawbacks of this approach, or anything else you want to share. So Dusan Jukic has I think it's kind of like an international brand at this point, called Straight Line Leadership or Straight Line Coach. He wrote a book called Straight Line Leadership, and what I love about Straight Line Leadership is that every chapter in the book is a distinction, and then he elaborates over the course of that chapter on putting that distinction into work in your life. So one really, really awesome distinction in there, one of many, there's like, I don't know, 57 or something, is knowing how to versus choosing to. And in that chapter, he talks about how like so often we let ourselves get stopped because we don't know how. I don't know how to reach out to people. I don't know how to create clients. I don't know how to ask her out on a date. I don't know how to blah, 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 blah. And what he's saying is that's never the problem. We get caught there because we fall into this story that that's what's missing, but it's never what's missing. You can type, how do I, and then whatever, excuse me, and you'll get a million answers in Google. Tons of valid answers. It's never that we don't know how to, it's that we are not choosing to. Once we shift into a state of choosing to do the thing, the how will resolve itself. If I really commit, if I really come from a place I am choosing to create a client, I will get into action. That's a really powerful distinction because it has people stop getting fuzzy and fudged up and kind of, faffing about, and they get into action. So there's a lot of really, really great distinctions in that book. What Tibby is sharing is that simultaneous to that, Duchamp can kind of be, I would say, a little uncaring. Some people might say aggressive or kind of unkind. I think the way I would put it is that he heavily biases himself towards rigor and less so towards love. And transformation, artful, masterful work in supporting people's transformation is the merger of those two. We bring both rigor and love. Love is the part where sometimes you're scared. And if I were to apply rigor when you're scared, I'd be like, I understand you're scared. Do the thing you said you were going to do. Otherwise, we're going to put this consequence on you. Sometimes that's called for. And then love is the part where it's like, I understand you're scared. Tell me about your fear. And I just hold where you are as perfect. We need both of those for transformation to really take root. Most coaching biases, and a lot of leaders, almost all leadership biases in one of those two directions. So like the sort of high executive level leadership, CEOs, Silicon Valley, a lot of that biases towards all rigor. And that's great, sort of. That's great until what's going to support your transformation next is love. And most of the people that respond to the all rigor approach are pretty unloving themselves, and they've learned to use rigor to drive themselves forward towards those results, usually because, fuck you, you're worthless, fuck you, story, I'm worthless, I'm going to create results. And so that rigor generates more results, but it does not create the internal shift. It actually just perpetuates the existing state that someone's in. And they create more of the kind of results they're reliable to create from that internal state, but no transformation, no radical shift in their experience, the way they show up, the way they're being in their life. So Duchamp, I find, really biases himself heavily towards the rigor. And I think Tibby's asking me, like, what are my thoughts on that? I think a lot gets missed. I reached out to Duchamp. I had a couple conversations with him back in the day. At one point, I was considering working with him, but I often left those calls feeling kind of like steamrolled, like run over. And I probably would have created something through that, but there was like something fundamentally missing. And I don't know that I would have created like the profound kind of breakthroughs that I create by virtue of the work I do with my coach, who brings a lot more love, a lot of love and trust in my process. So I think Straight Line Leadership is like an amazing book, and I highly recommend it to coaches and leaders, but I think it's also important they not stop there. And I think it's important that they recognize that's only part of the picture, and that if we start relating to that as the whole picture, what's going to happen is you're going to miss an entire half of what is called for to create transformation. Andrew's given a shout out to Tibby for what Tibby's been creating in the world as of late. Go Tibby. Thanks for putting that shout out into the space, Andrew. Okay, so Tibby's second question here is, I'd love to coach professional athletes, and I was wondering if you have any experience with such clients. Is coaching people in sports different? I mostly see mental coaches who basically just teach certain techniques, give their client tools, use NLP, but don't coach. That's no different than any other coaching niche. Look anywhere. Most coaching is like, here's some tools, here's some techniques, here's some strategies that we're going to layer over top of the way you are showing up in your life. So what I mean by a strategy is kind of like, I'm not getting up in the morning to do the thing that I say I want to do. Great, here's the strategy to make you get up. So like, let's snap our fingers and do NLP, and then we'll reset the thing, and then now you'll do the thing. Or let's find a way to set consequences that make you do what you're not willing to do, blah, blah, blah. That's where most coaching operates. It's sort of like, here's how you are. Now let's layer stuff over top to change that. And then in any coaching niche, there's always I got you, crows. loud crows. There's also the transformational layer. And the transformational layer looks at how have you learned to be? And if we held that sacred, on what level does that make sense? What's the story? What's the underlying belief about self? And if we work with that, perhaps we can change that and create transformation. And then whatever is the issue at the surface stops being the issue. So that's available. People want that in professional sports. And the first ever real book on transformational coaching was, I would say, called The Inner Game of Tennis, which is a great book. I highly recommend it, where a tennis coach realized that he started working with people, and a lot of those people would be like, oh, the problem is I'm hitting the ball too late. I'm always late on it, so drill that for me. Help me overcome that. And instead of doing that, he would kind of work with them to support them to change that internal story. And so he would do stuff like, I'm going to hit balls at you, and I want you just to like, never mind your belief about hitting late or anything. I just want you to visualize hitting the ball at the right time. I just want you to visualize hitting the perfect shot. And he found as he worked with people this way, their game started to shift. It was never about needing to change their rhythm or anything like that. It was the story that they had bad rhythm that then created the result of them having bad rhythm. So it was all that internal belief. So there is plenty of transformational work in coaching. The best coaches are always working transformationally, I would assert. Often they'll work with techniques too, but underneath that, the techniques lead them towards like whatever the underlying thing is, and then they support people to change that so that the technique can really take root. So that's the most profound type of coaching. To your question, Tibby, have I worked with people like that? I have. And where I always look in terms of like who's showing up in my practice is less what are they doing, because that's on the surface, and it's instead who is this person underneath whatever they're doing. So for example, the kind of people that find their way to like elite level athleticism typically have a tremendous muscle and commitment. They typically are like really, really good at things like dedication and like doing whatever it takes. And simultaneous to that, they often have a like strong underlying story of worthlessness, which fuels that doing whatever it takes, right? They'll like push way beyond that. And they often have learned really effectively to set aside their desires, or they've compartmentalized their desires. So there's like the one, desire, the gold medal, or the whatever the best, accolade is in their particular sport, that they go for, but all else falls away. And so they're really reliable to like become hyper intense and focused and go after one thing, but the rest of what they want in their life disappears. And then they tend to swing back and forth. So they tend to like, in their lives, tend to like have these moments where they become hyper focused and almost overly intense towards getting something. And then because they get tired of that, they feel the impact of that. They're like, this sucks, or I'm losing stuff that matters. They swing in the other direction, and they experience moments of like real apathy, because in order to manage that intensity, they turn down their passion, their commitment. And then where they're left is like, I get more of what I want in life, but simultaneous to that, I don't get to have that fire in me. I've kind of given up my passion. So you can probably see how that whole structure would really serve an Olympic athlete, especially because like the Olympics provide this window, this automatic time box in which to be super intense and then to go back the other direction. Olympics are over. Now I go back over here. I feel kind of apathetic until the next round. So there's like that natural time scale that's allowed there. But that way of being I've just described can show up in many, many different other spaces. That doesn't have to be something for the Olympics. I've seen that show up in like corporate executive leadership. Steve Jobs, a lot like this. A lot of these obsessive kind of leaders, that's the same way of being. And a lot of these people, they kind of go hard, experience burnout. Maybe they read Robin Sharma's book, like, what was that called? The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. And what that book largely does is advocate swinging the pendulum in the other direction. They kind of like go in the other direction and try to do like the 4-hour work week. You know, they pull away from that. But again, that only works for so long because now they've shut down their passion, their fire, their excitement, and their life is like manageable. They're kind of there as a parent or a husband or a wife or whatever, but they're bored. And then they start to get kind of destructive. So you can see this in many different areas of life. And how we work with it is rarely about the thing they're doing on the surface. How we work with it is, who is this person being? What is the essence of this person? And how do they want to be in their lives? How do they want to experience their lives? And what the vast majority of these people want is like, I want to feel that fire, but I don't want to have to sacrifice other parts of my life to have it. I don't want my relationships to fall away because of my intensity. And I want to have a life that feels somewhat balanced and manageable, but I don't want to have to give up my thriving passion, the burning desire that I have inside my heart. And that's typically where we work with those people. And that work is no different whether it's an Olympic athlete I'm supporting, a corporate executive CEO, a super driven lawyer, or like a hardcore entrepreneur that's really trying to make something happening. The underlying work is all irrelevant, not entirely, but largely irrelevant to what's happening on the surface. Hey, Randy, it's nice to see you, brother. I'm not. Well, maybe I am. I don't know. Okay, cool. Great question, Tibby. Monica's got a cool question here. I really am excited about this one. She says, hi, Adam. I'd love to learn how you think about coaching people that lack empathy. I have a client that admits that he lacks empathy. I waited for another couple sessions to know him better before buying into the story, but I believe it to be true. They think that he needs to be empathetic and curious to be a quote-unquote good leader, but he doesn't seem to have any curiosity or desire to know his people as people. He does understand that he can't fake this, that leaders who fake caring are sniffed out. I'd love to hear your take on this. So this is the point where we have to start. I heard that. Mallards. There's like mallards and then crows commingling. A real model of what's possible in our world. There's one mallard that's just giving me the stink eye, the sidal stink eye. I'm debating putting on mittens. It's a little bit chilly. I've got these nice snowboarding mittens here that are good when I'm on the one wheel. We'll see. Because then if I do that, then I can't gesture as effectively, and I like my hand gestures, so we'll see. Okay, so first thing is we have to introduce a distinction here, which is leadership. We develop leadership and those that are whole and complete. This means that if there's someone who's like diagnosably sociopathic, we're probably not going to try to do something because there's like a chemical imbalance. There's like a wire that's sort of out of alignment, and no amount of like trying to make that work is going to work because there's just that fundamental imbalance. However, there's more to that. Second, those people exist. Those people are in the world, and many of them can be high functioning. But we want to be super cautious about diagnosing that, because in my experience, as I go deeper into this work and get more and more curious about how what's happening on the surface makes complete sense from a beautiful starting point. Meaning, it makes sense that this person's showing up without empathy. Why? As opposed to, it makes sense that they're showing up without empathy. They're a robot. They're a zombie. They're a sociopathic, rule-based whatever. That's not really making sense. That's kind of cutting our inquiry to one thought, right? We just, no empathy, sociopath. Boom. Takes up all the space in the room, narcissist. Boom. We don't want to do that in leadership because that ends all of our exploration. I am going to put on mittens. It's going to be good. Are y'all ready for mitten time? The downside is I won't be able to read comments as well, but the upside is how warm my hands suddenly feel. So we put on these mittens, pull them on. Oh yeah, it's mitten time. It's been a while since we had a live with mittens. Hey Jamie, long time. So look how effective this is for making a point too. We'll move down a little bit. So when we have someone lacking with empathy, the place I like to always begin is an infant, a baby. I love you too, Jamie. It's nice to see you. Babies don't come out of the womb lacking empathy. Yes, I know we just mentioned sociopathy, but now we're setting that aside so that we can be in a conversation in service of leadership rather than a conversation that is kind of one and done, that just ends for us. So no baby comes out of the womb like, fuck you, mom, fuck you, dad, don't give a shit, what are the rules to follow, how do I amass wealth? Somewhere along the line, that baby learned to be that way. So that's where I always begin with people that find their way to me. The other part of this is like, people that are genuinely sociopathic do not engage with this conversation. They don't engage with leaders. They don't engage with clients, with coaches. So we can kind of set that aside. We can relinquish the safety of diagnosing people that way that come across our desks. So somewhere along the way, this person learned to shut down the innate quality of being a human, which is called empathy. So you kind of want to be like curious about that. That's where I always want to begin. I wonder what serves this person about their lack of empathy. That is how I'm holding this before any dialogue happens between us. Like if someone came to me and they're like, I really struggle with a lack of empathy. I don't give a fuck what people do or think or about them. What I want to kind of get curious about is like, that's not the natural state that humans operate in. So I wonder what that's about. I wonder on what level it makes sense that this is the way they learn to be. That's my internal state as I engage with them in conversation. Now, they're right that trying to empathize with people because you should, that's not going to work, because that's just adding one more layer of intellectualization over top of something that's already largely intellectual, right? Like most of the time when we become highly unempathetic, which is where I was when I began this work, I came into this work largely sociopathic. It made me a very effective lawyer. You could spit whatever venom you wanted at me, and I would kind of arrogantly and with like absolute impenetrability point out how stupid you were for spitting this venom at me. And so what's happened when people become non-empathetic is they've shut their heart down and they live through their head. And so then trying to be empathetic because I should do it because it's what a good leader does, that's just one more layer of thought. That's not going to actually make any difference. So the way to work with people like that is first to like invite them to let go of the should. Because as long as we should do something, it's hard for us to discover our own path back home. That should obfuscates it. It obscures it. It makes it hard for us to see the path back to our heart. Until someone lets go of the idea that they should be empathetic, they're not going to be able to just sit in their lack of empathy. And remember, a lot of this work is helping people bring from their unconsciousness up into their consciousness. And the way that works here is supporting these people to, one, let go of the idea that they should do anything. Start where you are. So you don't give a fuck about people. You got no empathy towards them. Great. Take that on. Like, really take that on. Take that on consciously. So if you really lean into that, what's the impact of that? What do you notice? How does it go for you? How do you feel when people don't give a shit about you? Oh, I feel fine. Yeah, that's fine. You feel fine. What else? That's the judgment about it. I'm okay. That's a judgment of how you feel. But how do you actually feel? And so at this stage, what we're doing is getting rid of any need for them to be any different and instead inviting them to really just be where they are. And what that does is it allows them to discover their process. It's really hard to discover your process when there's a should in the way, because the should, it messes it all up. It's like, even if I am feeling let me see if I can get the words here. Jamie, I just read, Jamie says, God, I just love listening to you talk. And then I'm like, none of the words are here. Where did the words go? I'm trying to find an example for like, if I should do something. So I would assert that there's a loneliness that is present when someone has no empathy. That's almost certain, right? Like, they're probably not feeling their loneliness, because that's the nice part about not feeling empathy. You don't feel anything. And so the fact that you're lonely is there, it's just not felt, which is kind of blissful ignorance, right? But I would assert all the same that there's some loneliness. Now, this person part of their journey is going to be to discover, like, how do I actually feel through all of this? What's the actual felt experience underneath all of this? But as long as they're like, I should want to connect with people, I should want to feel how people are, that's going to make it really hard for them to feel how they actually do. Because the should exists up here in their head, so they're going to get caught in that. And even though they might start to feel lonely, what they're going to get pulled away from feeling that underlying feeling with is, oh, stupid people, here's what I should do. And then they get into a battle with their head. And so we take away the should as the first step. And we have them just start to feel what they feel. What do you notice? Well, I don't feel anything. Okay, great. Do you think that's your default state? Is that the way you came out of the womb? When you were a baby, did you just kind of shrug your shoulders and be like, yeah, sure, I'll take some fucking milk from you. I'm not going to love you for it. Somewhere along the way, you learned this. And so if we can start to give them that context, then they can start to bring some curiosity about what they might actually be feeling. And as they start to feel what they feel, that is how people start to learn from their experience. Feeling stuff is the start of our experience. If I touch that hot stove, but I'm completely unaware of the feeling of my fingers burning, like if that's all below my consciousness, I will never gain experience from touching the hot stove. If I start to feel that pain, I learn, and I don't do it again. And so part of the really, I'm just distinguishing this for myself in this moment, but like part of what's so fascinating about this really effective strategy of shutting your heart off and living your head is you rob yourself of the opportunity to experience anything. And so what we're really doing is we're not telling them how to be, we're inviting them to actually start to plug into their own experience. And what I find is as people plug into their own experience more and more, first it's going to be scary and they're going to have resistance to it. We know that's true because there's a reason this person learned to shut off their empathy. And so they're going to be going against the safety of what that reason was. So it's going to be scary. They're going to have resistance to it. And at first what they might show up with is like, yeah, I felt like maybe kind of some annoyance with people. And our job in these situations is to like applaud that, like way to fucking go, way to feel annoyed. What else can you feel? Go a little bit further next time. Can you feel a little bit below that? And what we're doing is we're helping people unlearn shutting their hearts off. We're helping them to like rediscover how they feel and to use those feelings as a guide so they can start to find their path back. My belief is that so many of the problems we see in like corporate America, corporate Canada, corporate wherever, so many of the problems that people attribute to like capitalism. See, Andrew, thanks for hanging out. So many of these problems are actually resolved when we help people plug back into their experience. That's not an easy path. Like that can kind of sound like really simple or like, oh, you just plug into your experience. We have a lot of resistance to that. And so it requires like real softness and really like applauding every inch gained because it's not free. It's not easy. And we have a story like, I should just be able to do this. But that's not true. There's no truth that we should just be able to do this. This is hard work. And we have trained ourselves out of doing this. So what we're really doing is unlearning that, and that's happening in the face of a lot of fear. So we as coaches or leaders really want to applaud every inch gained. What'd you write here, Tara? Tara writes, oof, I know these feels, not so much regarding empathy, but the intensity of emotion, good or bad. All of that was terrifying to me. Me too. Yeah. We underestimate the potency of our fear, and we kind of hold like we should just be able to do this. Like there must be something wrong with us that I can't just do this. But that's nonsense. Most of us have built a life on not doing this, right? Like Monica's client has built an entire life, an entire approach to leadership, an entire thriving whatever he does, she does, whoever does, in service of not feeling this stuff. So we really want to hold this with a lot of reverence and a lot of gravitas. It's like it's kind of funny. This is a bit of a weird metaphor, but like in space, there's weightlessness, and astronauts talk about how like that weightlessness can kind of throw you off because you have big objects that are moving, And it's easy to sort of think like, oh, easy, I'll just push it and stop it, but they still have a tremendous amount of momentum. So it kind of messes with our, like here on Earth, a big object, you can't move it. It's just stuck there. Whereas in space, you can kind of nudge it and it'll start to move. But if you want to stop that movement, you got to apply a lot of force because there's so much mass behind it. Even if it has weightlessness, it still has mass. And so we want to almost hold this stuff a little bit like an astronaut holds a very massive object in space. It's like, yeah, it seems like you should be able to move it easily, but it has a great deal of gravity. So let's hold it and relate to it that way. Jamie writing, we are emotional beings, and if we shut off our compass, then we are really doing ourselves a huge disservice. Yeah, the place I want to I guess maybe tweak that is that's an easy path to go down and end up at like, fuck, why am I doing this to myself? I'm doing a disservice to myself. We shut off our emotional compass because it served us to do so, because it was essential. It was a pristine and perfect thing we did when we did it. And so we really want to support each other to really recognize everything we did that got us here is sacred. We did it not because we're dumb or stupid or self-destructive, but because that was what was necessary to get here. And so there might be something we want now for which shutting our emotional center off no longer serves us. But I think it's important to really to always be shining light onto this stuff rather than casting it into the darkness, because that's what gets us into trouble in the first place. So those are the thoughts, Monica. Awesome question. Thank you for that. Okay, last thing we've got today. America asks, can I speak to a vulnerability hangover? Hell yeah. For example, trying out a new way of being in the world. As a result, it feels very foreign. There's a lot of self-doubt or second-guessing that follows. So a vulnerability hangover is that experience we have where we've done something vulnerable. We've tried something new, and typically, anytime you do something new that's edgy, it's pushing into the realm of fear. There's like new stuff you can do that isn't edgy. So for example, like I serve the ball in pickleball. Today I'm just going to serve the ball out. That's probably not going to be too edgy. It's new. It's not something I do, but it's not out on the skinny branches of my life. It's not like, whoa, I'm radically pushing into a different way of being. But the stuff that you do where you practice something new and it's outside of your identity, it's outside of who you know yourself to be. For example, who I know myself to be when I first started this work was closed off, quiet, intelligent, shy, talked to my best friends, kind of had small talk, charming, glib chatter with other people, but that was it. And then who I was practicing being was like trusting the connection that I was, that people reflected to me when I started to learn about my essence. They're like, oh, you're like connection. You really bring a space together. And I was like, what? That's crazy. And so I was practicing trusting that. And so one of the ways I did that is I'd get on the bus and I'd strike up a conversation. That was fucking terrifying because all the rules that I'd created for myself, life, the way the world was, the way strangers ought to be, was don't fucking talk to me when I'm on the bus. I'm doing my thing. And now I'm pushing outside of that self-created rule. Very frightening. Some people didn't want to talk to me. Other people did. Cool. So I'm in the practice of being connection. Being something doesn't mean that the world always responds positively to it. That's okay. That's only a problem if I say, hey, how you doing? And someone says, oh, I'm fine, and puts their head in the book, and I tap them on the shoulder and don't receive the feedback from them about what they would like. It's okay to be like, hey, how you doing? And someone to be like, ignore you. That's okay. So that kind of new way of showing up, that kind of where you're stepping into something that's edgy for you, that goes against the world you have created for yourself and the identity you've created for yourself. When we practice like that, we're pushing into fear, always. And the way you know that to be true is the reason you created these stories about yourself is because it protected you from your fear. As long as I had these sort of hard and fast rules about what was and was not acceptable in terms of connecting with people, I didn't have to like face rejection. I didn't have to face people when I was like, "Hey, how's it going?" They're like, "You're stupid," and then that'd be kind of funny if that's what happened on the bus. It'd be a good story. I didn't have to face that. And so anytime we push outside of this, we're pushing into our fear. The vulnerability hangover is the feeling we have after we've done something like that. So it can come the next day, it can come the next week, it can come the next minute. It doesn't really matter. The point is what's happened is you've leaned into some fear. You've started to push into like a new identity for yourself, to go beyond your existing story about yourself, to create yourself as something different, to be in alignment with more of how you actually naturally are. And when we do that, especially when we're practicing early on, we haven't completely shed our old identity. So what's happening is like, let's imagine I got on the bus and I turned to someone, I'm like, "Hey, I'm Adam." And they're like, "Good for you." And then they go back to their book. What's happening is my old stories about myself are still there. I haven't fully dropped them. I haven't fully stepped into that new way of being, that new story about who I am. And so when that person says "good for you" and turns back to their book, all those old stories start to really shout loudly. They're like, "See, stupid, this is why you don't do this. This is why we don't talk to people on the buses. This is why it's inappropriate to talk to people on buses. People don't want to be interrupted by you on buses. No one wants to talk," all of that sort of stuff. So what's happening is we're stepping into new territory. We're practicing being, creating ourselves a different way in our lives. And those old stories have not yet fully been shed. And that liminal space between creating a new version of yourself and the old version that you got by on up to this point are in a fight with each other. Another way you can kind of think of it is like when the caterpillar goes into the chrysalis, the cocoon, and then molts whatever it does, metamorphoses into the butterfly, what happens in that disgusting bag of goo is that the caterpillar cells are starting to die, and the butterfly cells, ideation cells are called, start to get created. And as the butterfly cells start to get created, initially, most of the DNA in that goo bag is a caterpillar's. And that caterpillar's immune system kills the butterfly cells. It fights, it recognizes them as something foreign, fights and kills them. And over time, more of the caterpillar dies and more of the butterfly cells are being created, such that that immune system slowly but surely dies off and can no longer keep up, and eventually the butterfly comes through. That process of attacking the butterfly cells, that's like the vulnerability hangover. That's the process of like the old still trying to reassert itself. So America says there's a lot of self-doubt, a lot of second-guessing. Absolutely. There's a tremendous amount of it. And what that self-doubt and second-guessing is designed to do, it's a mechanism of your ego. And remember, your ego has one beautiful job: protect you from what you are afraid of, keep you here where it's safe. And so it's a mechanism, the self-doubt and the criticism and the second-guessing, that's your ego using a tool to bring you back to the old way of being. If I can fill you with self-doubt, then what are you going to do? You're going to stay right where you are. And we know that right where you are is safe. We've got evidence of however many years you've been right here, right where you are. The hard part, and this is like kind of what I'm teaching in integration classes too with plant medicine, the hard part is seeing that self-doubt, that second-guessing, our story about it showing up is we did something wrong. The story that's more empowering and what I really invite you to hold is like when second guessing and self-doubt is showing up, consider you've done something really right. Consider that that's like a sign that you've stepped into the unknown. You've stepped into creating yourself a new way. And your ego's frightened. Your ego's working and you're frightened. And your ego's working to protect you from that. So when that stuff starts to show up, often we're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do this. Oh, maybe that was the wrong thing to do. It was the perfect thing to do. And the fact that the self-doubt is showing up is how you know that. So well done. I salute you for creating that. Jamie writing, what an amazing topic. I absolutely love the way you explain this. Thanks, Jamie. Anything else I want to say to the vulnerability hangover? What typically happens when we have this show up is that we do whatever we've learned to do as like a strategy to manage our fear. So for many of us, we get really ruthless with ourselves. That was fucking stupid. I shouldn't have done that. Or like get caught up in trying to argue with our self-doubt. Kind of like a legal battle going on in your head between your self-doubt and then yourself and then back and forth. And what all of these things do is they halt our process. They get us locked into this sort of erstwhile kind of, otherwise conversation rather than the one that keeps us moving forward. And so the practice when something like this shows up, when we find ourselves in a vulnerability hangover, is to really be loving and gentle with ourselves. What you've done is you've kind of like taken an elastic band and stretched it, and the vulnerability hangover is the part where you're letting it go back to its usual state. Those of us that are like hard with each other, like rigorous with ourselves, what we want to do is like, don't go back because we're scared we'll lose the thing, so we stretch further. And what that does is it breaks it. It causes harm. And still other of us make that conversation really meaningful. It's like we just put the elastic band and then we're like, I will stretch you again in 7 years. And that's, just going to keep the same pattern going. So we want to try to hold ourselves with a lot of grace, a lot of loving kindness, and then continue down that path of stretching the elastic band. And that's how we create transformation. That's how it takes place. Okay, I'm going to give you a quick view of this park we're in. And then I'm going to go to the bathroom. I'll stop the live first. I should have different order, but then, yeah, that's what'll happen. So look at this mallard hanging right here. This guy's just chilling, looking at me. Look at this little booger right here. He's got kind of a purple head. What a goofball. And then there's people over there wandering. Let's see if I can show you the band shell. You can't really see it, but right there is where I used to practice breakdancing. And then there's people all around. Look at these stupid people in my park. You know what, people? Enjoy my park with my blessing. Okay, that's all we've got for this weekend. Super, super, super thanks to everyone that submitted topics. It's so rich and rewarding and like such a gift to me when you provide these topics. So like shout outs to Jess, Austin, Tibby, Monica, and America. Thank you guys so much. I really, really, really appreciate you. And thank you everyone that came and hung out and chilled in the park with me this Friday. Andrew's saying he got totally lost in Beacon Hill Park last time trying to find my way around. Yeah, it's a nice big park. It's cool to have this in our backyard. All right, have a great weekend, guys. Peace.